Morning. May I call to order the public hearing held by the panel on welfare services. We have a quorum and it is the appointed time. Today we are going to have a hearing on the proposed legislation to implement the recommendations of the Law Reform Commission report on child custody and access and relevant support measures. You should have received a few papers before the meeting. Those should be 4, but I won't detail them here. Now let us invite the deputations and individuals and also the officials to come in. Good morning. I'd like to welcome Mr. Chang Kin, PAS, Mr. Kenneth Chan, PAS, Labour and Welfare Bureau, Ms. Karen Chan, PAS, Home Affairs Bureau, Ms. Anisa Ma, Acting Assistant Director, Social Welfare Department. As you know, the consultation period has ended already. Between November 2015 to March 2016, consultation was conducted on this LRC report. As you can see, from para 12 of the paper, it says that the administration will propose the paper for discussion by LegCo in 2018, and that is whether the Social Welfare Department will also comment on the various ways forward. We are inviting the deputations and individuals here so that we can hear them. There are 19 deputations and individuals who will be speaking at the meeting. And I hope the Bureau and departments will let us know what you plan to do between 9 and 2018. As you have already consultation, I understand you have also received divergent views. In fact, the views are in one-third, and other one-third categories. Some people say yes, some people say they need more resources and support, and some people actually object. So are you going to put this on hold as a result, or how are you going to deal with it? Mr. Chang, you might like to address this point later on. Deputations and individuals, there are 19 of you today. I think you know the procedures well, but I'll just mention that if you need to listen to the different channels, I'd like to tell you that 0 channel is floor, channel 1 is Cantonese, channel 2 English, and channel 3 Putonghua. You'll be invited to speak in turn, and each one of you will have 3 minutes. And I have to make the best use of the time today because I need to attend another meeting at 11:30. I'd like to remind deputations and individuals that whatever you say here is not covered or protected by the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance. And the submissions you hand to us are not covered by the legislation either. In other words, you have to take up legal responsibility for what you say and what you present to us. There are people in the public gallery. Please avail yourselves to the knocked for attention for people who attend meetings in the public gallery in the Legislative Council complex. If you are not aware of that note, please ask the security guards for a copy. And deputations and individuals, if you are not presenting any submissions to us, you can give them to us anytime after the meeting. At the start of the meeting, we will invite Mr. Chang to introduce the issue to us. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Chang. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. As the Chairman was saying, in order to implement the LRC report on child custody and access and relevant support measures, In other words, that we should go down the legislative route to introduce the parental responsibility model into the family law in Hong Kong. In 2015, we drafted the relevant legislation. That is only a first draft. In November 2015 until March 2016, we consulted the public on that first draft legislation, and also we consulted the public on the relevant support measures. During the public consultation period, we received a total of 150 written submissions from 50 associations, groups, and about 90 individuals. So altogether, 150 written submissions on the Child Proceedings Parental Responsibility Bill. 34.5% said they supported the proposed legislation and that they would support the implementation of the legislation at this stage. And then 20% supported the proposed legislation in principle, but they requested that additional support measures and resources must be put together before implementing the legislation. And then another 34.5% said that they objected the proposed legislation in principle, and they doubted the practicability of the parental responsibility model. And then there are a remaining 11% who do not indicate their views clearly. After the consultation period, we have been working on the opinions collected, especially those from legal bodies. In fact, they commented on the draft provisions in the bill. They mentioned those as a matter of principle, or they commented on the technical side. And we are now revising the draft legislation, and that task will take some time. At the same time, we are considering the way forward apart from legislation on the basis of the views collected. We have heard one very clear voice during the consultation period, and that is different organizations have said with one voice that there should be sufficient support measures put together before the legislation is put in place. We have heard that loud and clear. We have emphasized that whether or not there is legislation to implement the model, that is parental responsibility model, we would be doing other things to promote the model, say by way of publicity and education. During the consultation period, in fact, in our consultation paper, we listed the publicity and education work on parenting that has always been undertaken by the SWD, including large-scale publicity campaigns, and also manuals on shared or joint parenting for separated parents, and we have also set up a dedicated website on joint parenting. We also conducted pilot on short-term psychosocial programs for parents who are separated or who are thinking of separation. Since the end of the consultation period, while we are revising the draft legislation, we have not stopped doing other things. In September 2016, through the Lotteries Fund, we rolled out a 2-year pilot on child access, and that is undertaken by the Family Welfare Association, and that is the Children Contact Center or pilot scheme on children contact service. After the consultation period, the SWD has stepped up what can be done by frontline their social workers, and that is training for social workers at integrated family service centers and family and child protective services units. And this has to do with co-parenting or parenting coordination, and so that social workers at the front line can provide more appropriate counseling and help to these families. As I said, I have talked about a pilot or short-term psychoeducational program. Now it has been extended to all integrated family service centers. We are not going to stop doing all these support measures. We'll be taking this two-pronged approach, and we are actually going to strengthen such support services in the future. I will stop here with my introduction, and I will be happy to respond after listening to associations. Thank you, Mr. Chang. I allowed you to introduce the paper because after the deputations have spoken, I hope you will actually respond to what they are going to say instead of giving a general introduction. Okay, now we'll have the first deputation, Ms. Fong Lin from Hong Kong Island Single Parent Mutual Help Society. 3 minutes. Thank you. We are set up by a group of single parents. We are concerned about policies and welfare for single parents, and we hope that you can help us with our difficulties. Starting from 2012, the Labor and Welfare Bureau consulted the public on whether there should be legislation to implement the parental responsibility model. And then in 2015, the LW Bureau again rolled out the LLC report on child custody and access. And they consulted us on the proposed legislation. Our association objects to the proposed legislation. We believe it will mean more pressure and even more difficulties for single parents. In 2016, we interviewed our members. Over 90% indicated that they would object to the implementation of the parental responsibility model, and that there would be a kind of arrangement orders in order to replace the present child custody and access rights. Most of the interviewees indicated that the arrangement would subject single parents and their children to negative impacts, including physical, psychological, child relationships, economic, and work aspects. Different problems will crop up. Most of them indicated that after a divorce, the two parties will find it hard to communicate. If there should be a consensus to be reached on child custody, it will mean even more difficulties for them. When they meet, there will only be disputes, and there will be a deterioration of relationship between the two parties and also that with their children. But the administration continues to overlook the views of single parents. You are still going down the legislative route. We feel very angry and very unhappy with this mode of operation.
As a single parent, with the following reasons, we object to legislation on the joint responsibility model. First of all, a joint responsibility model is not equivalent to the presence of responsibility. Responsible parents would willingly coordinate even without the presence of legislation in order to benefit their children, and they would take care of their children together. Ms. Fong, please speed up. But for irresponsible parents, they would not suddenly become responsible even with the legislation in place. For maintenance payments, a lot of single-parent families could not recover maintenance payments. So we hope the government can help retrieve the payments for these families in order to ease their burden. If the maintenance payments cannot be paid up, how can we be talking about responsibility? Your time's up. Next, Mr. Wong Pik Lam from the Hong Kong Coalition of Social Service. And the basis of the parental responsibility model is to secure best interest for the children. But in order to implement the proposal of the Law Reform Commission, there are two important principles. One is to provide comprehensive services for incomplete families, and we also have to deal with the defaults of maintenance payments. So I'd like to focus on the support services today. Currently, the support to incomplete families are mainly provided by the Integrated Family Service Centers and the FCPSU. And IFSCs would provide emotional or welfare support to individuals, while the FCPSUs will deal with cases referred by the courts and draft reports for cases of divorce and on child custody and access. And these are responsive services, and they have nothing to do with the parental responsibilities of the divorced parents. And social workers would face constraints when they deal with such cases, and the same case might be dealt with by multiple social workers, and it's very difficult to assess their needs. The LRC hopes to take in more voices from the children, but most services are targeted towards adults, and there's a lack of support towards children. The wishes of children are often not respected. And with these conflicts and constraints of the model, this is not something the social workers can overcome. That's why we feel there's a need to set up one-stop integrated services in order to complement the existing family services. The Principal Assistant Secretary talked about the launch of the pilot project on children contact service in 2016, which was a good idea. But the project focused on children contact service. We still have to deal with the overall services. We have to make sure that parents can visit their children with the right state of mind and develop their parenting capabilities. Currently, this is not being taken care of. We only have a single children contact center in the entire Hong Kong, and we feel that at least 4 integrated service centers should be set up, and we should tackle parenting coordination and come up with children-friendly facilities. So before the legislation rolls out, we have to deal with the support services and maintenance payments in order to secure the best interests for children. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Choi Sin-man. And we were set up in 1981, and we set up the first hotline for women, and we provided free legal counseling on the family law. On the current legislative exercise, we have 3 main concerns. One is hidden domestic violence, single-parent families, and support services. Without a maintenance board or divorce support center, we are against the legislation. When we look at Singapore, they currently provide services without legislation. They have children-focused centers, and services can be provided before divorces happen, and agents are deployed to retrieve payments. The legislative process in Singapore is very similar as Hong Kong. Can legislation really promote parental responsibility? According to a study report, until legislation can clarify how parental responsibility can be established, and without understanding of the court's orders, legislation cannot help educate people. We understand that there is a good intent behind the legislation, but enforcement would be an issue. I'm sure you would agree that legislation cannot promote relationships or communication. According to an Australian study, legislation cannot change parents' mindsets, and there's also potential abuse. When we look at the position of maintenance payments in Hong Kong, more than 80% of the people who reach out to us had issues with maintenance payments. And we also conducted a study, and we found that 60% of the respondents had difficulty receiving maintenance payments, and sometimes their ex-husbands disappeared, and in some cases there were domestic violence. So we saw that a maintenance board is necessary to the legislation, and they really go hand in hand. A lot of people are already suffering, and the government failed to persuade the public to legislate. So without a maintenance board and divorce support center, we are against legislation. Thank you. The Hong Kong Islands Single Parent Family Association is against the legislation, and other bodies are asking for maintenance board before supporting the legislation. Ms. Han from the Divorce Support Concern Group. Joint custody has always existed, but the legislation would mandate that upon parents. In many cases of joint custody, there are arguments among the ex-couples. You said that support services are being provided, but in terms of child custody, both parties would often have differences in opinion. And they would often request the courts to make certain decisions. So a lot of women have to deal with legal proceedings or litigations, but very often those cases have not been successful. For more complicated cases, mediation is likely to fail. And some women are taking part in co-parenting programs. And very often the children would follow their mothers, and a lot of information is needed. But at the end, these cases often failed, as a lot of women face legal proceedings. They have to split the time between taking part in mediation and taking care of their children, and they also have to take part in co-parenting programs in order to establish communication on the custody of their child. They have to spend a lot of time very often, and they still have to prepare legal documents to respond to the other party on issues relating to child custody, how to take care of their children, etc. So these women are tremendously stressed, and a lot of the current programs are fragmented in nature. And sometimes the women are already setting up meetings in the FCP SUs, but there are a lot of conflicts even in cases with social workers. So this is certainly very difficult for the women. So we wonder what is the point of legislation. At the end of the day, perhaps a sole custody order is more beneficial to the women. That's all. Thank you. Ms. Zhang Pik-kyun from the Maintenance Payment Concern Group. Good morning. I'm a member of the Maintenance Payments Concern Group. We are asking for repayment, so I wonder how you all feel about the current situation. Just now, our officer told us that it has always been very difficult to retrieve maintenance payments. And in 2001, the government made a number of improvements, for example, by introducing the attachment of income order. So if the payee refuses to pay, the interest will pile up on top of the maintenance payments. But has it been effective? The answer is no. In some cases, the women still had to try to retrieve the payments themselves. Some of them are capable, but others are not. First of all, they need to know where their husbands or ex-husbands live, whether they have the money, and whether their ex-husbands would agree to meet them, but because of different reasons, they often fail to retrieve the payments. The government have not been providing any support. So I wonder why you failed to set up a maintenance board after more than 10 years. So I think this is something the government needs to think about.
Moreover, there is another difficulty with maintenance payments. According to the Census and Statistics Department report, in 2016, 362,000 odd divorcees had terminated their marriages, and 56,000 had to secure maintenance. However, this is not a big number out of the number of divorcees. Why is that so? It is because it is impossible to secure the payments. On the average, the awarded maintenance is just $1,700 on average. Think about having $1,700 and the Mid-Autumn Festival is around the corner, and how can you pay for even a feast with your families? But of course, if you go to a cooked food stall, that can see you through a few meals. And these people will also apply for CSSA to make up for the shortfall. It's quite strange that if you apply for CSSA, which will give you $1,900, it will first discount the $1,700. In other words, you will get peanuts. And then what happens? You yourself will have to chase up for the maintenance payments, and you have to prove yourself that your man cannot pay, that he is unable to pay, and then the CSSA will give you the whole amount. However, if $1,700 is always discounted and you get only peanuts from CSSA, how do you expect these people to tie over? How can the children have a proper life? Children are the pillars of society, but they are in a plight, and you are still sitting with your arms folded. Sorry, your time is up. Your time is actually exceeded. I just want to ask the HAB one question. You want to propose legislation, but do you have a concrete way to help people chase up maintenance payments? Thank you. We will ask those questions. And that is, what are you doing with the concept of a maintenance board that has been with us for 20 years? What will the HAB do about this? As you know, the SWD should know that when people cannot get maintenance, they will turn to CSSA. Is this something the SWD likes to see? Next, Ms. Chen Kuai-fan, Women Help Hotline. Yes, I am a volunteer. Under present divorce laws, there are already arrangements made for child custody and access, and we therefore object to having parental responsibility model, because people who are lowly educated and who don't have the means will not get equal protection under the law when they go to the court. At present, you are having a pilot on child contact, but there are already many problems. We'd like you to do like Singapore, that there could be a one-stop divorce support center in order to make up for the shortfall in services at present IFSCs. We hope at least there will be 5 such centers to start with, that is one-stop divorce centers that are scattered around Hong Kong. And the services they should provide should not be limited to child contact. Rather, there should be child-based family needs assessment, public education, professional training in order to help divorced parents practice the principle of best interests of children and also to resolve disputes about parenting. We hope there will be child-friendly perspectives adopted to help children tackle parental divorce. And we should also allow children to express their views as to visits by parents. We'd like you to include separated parents and also those who are thinking of divorce. And you should not only tackle high-risk cases or those that are already in the judicial process. We should also have a gender-sensitive perspective in order to take care of the psychological needs of divorced parents. The centers should at least measure 4,000 square feet in order to make sure that children can contact their parents in a safe and ideal situation. Say there should be different entrances and exits for the different parties when they contact their children, so as to avoid parents who are emotional and who are still unhappy with each other to come into contact with each other. And at these centers, there should be children's books and toys. And since there may be a higher risk, we hope there would be enough support services. As for financial support, each center should tackle 220 cases a year, and a social worker should only tackle 30 cases at any one time. There should be a service manager, social workers, and also clinical psychologists at all these centers. And these professional workers should have at least 5 years experience working with families, and there should be one senior counseling officer who can handle more complicated cases. And they can also provide clinical psychological support for workers at the centers. We'd like you to start with 5, but then in the end there should be 1 in every district. Thank you very much. The Hong Kong CSS is proposing 4, you are proposing 5, where there are 5 major regions. Just now I forgot to clarify one point. Ms. Chang, you support immediate legislation or do you object? We object. You say there should be enough support measures before there should be legislation. Yes, that's correct. The same for Ms. Zhang, is that right? I also object, unless you have all the support services in place. Next, Ms. Chen Yingman, Women Legal Support Services. Thank you, Chairman. There are many disputes with regard to child access and maintenance. Very often, even violence can take place when there are access cases, and separated couples can fight physically and they can hurt their children. The court has already made orders about child custody and access. However, if either party cannot comply with the order, in the end they will go to court again. In many cases, they have applied for legal aid for a few years and they would go in and out of the court for a few years. However, the problem remains. And there has been a case where the legal aid was stopped. However, the problem stayed. And I'd like to tell you one case. There has been arrears of maintenance for 10 years, totaling $400,000. The person has to maintain 2 children on her own, and she has been chasing up for maintenance through different channels, including summons, plaintiff, and also a stop-and-watch kind of arrangement with the police and immigration. However, there could be no order issued because that person is a self-employed person. Now, if we cannot help these people with legal aid, and if they do not attend joint parenting or co-parenting courses together, and they cannot go to the child contact centers together, there is no resolution about child access. And then about maintenance, they cannot apply for legal aid. They cannot get the income directly of the person from the employer. In the end, the person has to bring up her 2 children on her own. There is absolutely no economic or psychological support for her whatsoever. If you are mandating such legislation, I can only say that that will always just be an ideal. But in the end, there would be more verbal and physical violence, and children's rights would even be more sacrificed. I therefore would ask the administration to answer 2 questions. Number 1, before legislation, can we first set up a gender perspective one-stop divorce support center, and that it should be a regular kind of service? And 2, do you have a concrete timetable in order to tackle the non-payment of maintenance? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chan. The SWD will have to answer directly this question because this one-stop divorced parents support center with a gender perspective has been on the drawing board for 20 years. And then Hong Kong Law Society, Mr. Hong Wang Tao. Thank you. The Law Society supports the concerns raised. I don't think I can respond to all the concerns raised in detail within 3 minutes. In fact, I'd like to respond to all the concerns raised so that I can explain to you why the proposed legislation is going to resolve those matters to a certain extent. From the angle of the Law Society, we support the proposed legislation. As for support services, if you look at it closely, we are already starting to provide support services. It's just that it will never be enough. Whether or not we have new legislation, we still have to do a good job with support services. But after we have new legislation, the administration will have the responsibility to fork out money in order to provide all the support services we require. Just now, some speakers mentioned domestic violence. The judiciary is ready to issue a practice guide in order to tackle domestic violence. The practice guide will state that whenever there is any domestic violence, the court will give it immediate attention. The practice guide will be issued very soon. And by that I mean after the proposed legislation is passed. As for maintenance, yes, it has been with us for decades. The HAB cannot shirk the responsibility anymore. As we all know, maintenance is a serious issue. Recently at the Court of Appeal, it has made it even more difficult for us to secure maintenance payments, and that is why the HAB cannot drag its feet anymore. Other speakers mentioned the single parent custody or sole custody order. In Section 28 of the existing law, in certain circumstances, the other parent's responsibility can be removed, and so a sole custody order can in fact be actually implemented. Remember, at the court now, there are many procedures which can help us address present social needs in order to assist both parents. If you have noticed, we don't even mention custody now. We don't mention custody anymore. We are talking about arrangements. Therefore, if the Law Society can help you understand the bill more, we would be very happy to do it. Mr. Ho, you mentioned a new case heard at the Court of Appeal, and that would have an impact on the maintenance issue. Can you now tell us a little about it? Yes, basically, we are talking about judgment summons, and the procedure has been made more complicated.
The summons are already difficult enough in terms of enforcing the maintenance payments, and in the Court of Appeal earlier this year, a new president was quoted as splitting the summons into two parts, and the payee must be proved to have the money, and criminal standards would be applied. And at family law or family court proceedings, they are civil in nature. So the maintenance orders granted are based on the balance of probabilities. But for criminal cases, the principle is to prove beyond reasonable doubt, and the two are very different. So the summons are a major challenge, and they must be divided. They must be separated into two parts. First of all, the payee must be proved to have the money, and criminal standards would be applied. After that, the court can decide whether or not to punish the party defaulting the payment. So the difficulty is even greater than before. Mr. Wong Kai-yum from the New Women Arrivals League. We serve new women arrivals, and we have dealt with a number of divorce cases that involved domestic violence and court proceedings. According to what we discussed just now, apparently we can proceed to the legislation very soon with the support services, but even with support services, we are against the legislation, and there are a number of reasons. And I would talk about the feasibility. First of all, I have a few concepts to clarify. Over the course of consultation, the government officials would tell us that even after a divorce, parents have the responsibility to take care of their children. For cases of domestic violence, we are talking about the abuser and the party being abused, and if we do not consider this relationship or connection, legislation would not be effective. We have said that children's best interests are the most important. But we doubt we can really achieve this goal. For the women or children being abused, we must respect their rights as well. We must respect the rights of the parties being abused, even though children's rights are also important. So sometimes the victims suffered heavily. The government listed some scenarios in countries like US and UK in their papers. But we saw that there has been a backlash in some of these countries, and they have seen more violent cases after legislation, and they fail to offer the right services. So they are already having a debate on how to go back. But Hong Kong has ignored the latest situation or positions, so I really doubt the credibility of such papers. In overseas countries, 80 or 90% of the cases involved domestic violence. So the legislation would only help peaceful families, but for the remaining 80 to 90%, it would not work. The government must offer the right figures in order to convince us. Currently, at the family court, how many cases are to do with domestic violence? Without the information, would you first do some research in order to convince us? Currently, a lot of mediation services are available, but have they been effective or successful? Do you have any figures on the success cases? Currently, in a lot of the cases, the courts have granted joint custody order, but a lot of legal proceedings would still follow. Can you offer figures on these as well? If you can offer the numbers, then we can assess objectively on whether there is a need for legislation. The government said that the measures are already in place and legislation only serves to bring convenience to the courts. But a lot of our women would face even greater stress or suffer from domestic violence. So we must take these lives and experiences seriously. can legislation really help the women? This is something the government can address. I will later ask the Law Society to speak again. Hopefully we can have a conversation today. Next, Mr. Choi Tin Yam from the DAB Hong Kong. Thank you. Good morning. The DAB supports the Law Reform Commission's proposal based on children's rights. I did some research ahead of this meeting, and I have with me the judgments of three lawsuits, and they have actually considered the best interests of the children. And the judges would be told of the children's rights. The DAB also has concerns about the support measures, and I want to offer our views. For the Children Contact Center introduced in 2016, there is only one single Children Contact Center in Hong Kong, located in Lai Chi Kok. And staff from the Children Contact Center will speak in a moment. We wonder whether a single center is enough to serve all of Hong Kong. And do we have enough support measures? We agree that more contact centers must be set up. In the past, people had to meet in McDonald's, fast food chains, or game centers. But with regards to how many centers we need, this is up for discussion. And I want to declare interest. I'm a mediator, and I have been a social worker as well. Mr. Chang said you will enhance training on family issue mediators. And as I know, not every integrated family service centers have dedicated social workers on family matters. Some deputations have proposed a one-stop service centers for divorced families, and they can offer services such as anger management and co-parenting. So we hope to take in more views. Thank you very much. From the Family Welfare Council, Ms. Sun. So perhaps you would want to know about what the children thinks. And according to a study with CUHK, 80% of the children feel that they have been ignored by their parents, and they have been our service targets. They feel uneasy, and they want to meet their parents more. So for divorced parents, they should learn more about co-parenting that would be beneficial to their children. The spirit of the law reform is to consider the best interests of the children through co-parenting. The government should take the lead and work with the labor and welfare and legal sectors in order to achieve a paradigm shift. There is a lack of support towards non-residing parents, and for example, at IFSCs, if the divorced parents live in different areas, it will be very hard for the IFSCs to contact them. And this is against the legislative spirit. So the government should launch a one-stop family service center for divorced families. And in 2013, we introduced children-based parenting coordination, and we have offered co-parenting services for many families. But unfortunately, the fund will end next year with the conclusion of the funding support. So more services should be provided by the government to plug the gap. And we worked on we joined the pilot project on children contact service. And I'd like to share the views of of one non-residing parent. The service allowed us to meet our children, and the night before before I visited my son, I was sleepless, and I didn't expect my son to still remember me, and he missed me a lot, and I was deeply touched. I wanted to cry, and I hoped my son would always remember me. We hope to regularize the contact service and enhance the scope of service. There should be a permanent location, and there should be more centers in order to help more families with divorced parents, and the children can rebuild bridges with their parents, and they can again feel the love of their fathers and mothers. Thank you very much for telling us what the children and parents feel. There should be 4 or 5 contact centers instead of just one, and we also need children-based support services. So we are starting to see some concrete ideas. Mr. Wai Ming from the IFSC Concern Group of the Hong Kong Social Workers General Union. We are made of social workers from non-governmental IFSCs. The government is discussing a number of services such as street sleeper services or those for ethnic minorities, and they would remind us on they would mention us whenever they talk about any kind of services. So they again mention us when they talk about co-parenting. So apparently we can do everything.
Is it that we are that omnipotent officials? Think about this. You always say IFSCs can help, and we can always help with everything, but the lawyer sitting in front of me is shaking his head. About this LRC report, we support the direction. We see families and children who need all the support services they can have before they can meet. Meeting is something so difficult for them. And yet, why are we haggling over such a good thing? We have talked about the maintenance board. You know, we have maintenance laws, but we have been talking about that board for decades. And yet we don't have it. So it seems we have the law, it seems we have progressed and civilized, and yet you don't implement it because you don't have all the support services. How can people have confidence? Just now, Ms. Chang from the Women's Help Hotline talked about 4 to 5 centers, one-stop centers. We support that wholeheartedly. Otherwise, how can the public have confidence? Do that first. Legislation is comparatively easy, yet you don't do it. How can people have confidence? I have this case recently. As family social workers, we receive divorce cases every day, and recently I tried to arrange for access for the man, and I was meeting him once every fortnight, and I had to talk to him for 8 times before he understood what contact service was. I referred him, and he had to wait 2 months, and then in the end he was able to see his child. In other words, from my contact with him, from my working on him, and then the other party had to do a lot with safety planning, etc. You think child contact is that easy? The father was able to see his son only after 5 years. First, we believe you should set up the maintenance board to allow people to have confidence. And now there is a serious lack of support services. I hope the HAB, the SWD, please address the issue. IFSC frontline workers may not be speaking up, but we have so much grievance. We are so worried, and we are afraid that we will collapse. So please have all the support services available before you talk about legislation. Thank you. The Hong Kong Social Workers General Union has made a most valid point. I'm sure the SWD will say the IFSCs are expected to be the one-stop service center. Whatever we talk about here, they mention IFSC. They will say there are enough resources always at the IFSCs. But a frontline worker has told us that is not the case. They are reaching saturation point. Next. Ms. Wong Kin Chiu from Hong Kong YWCA. Thank you, Chairman. We are a group of volunteers supporting women. We are very worried about the proposed legislation. It is not that we are over worried because we face actual problems. Let me tell you what these divorced women face. There is no legislation yet, but then in many cases, judges are already promoting the adoption of this direction, and that is co-parenting. In certain cases, co-parenting is already meted out by courts. But in fact, that can give rise to a lot of problems, as detailed by other deputations. You know, the parents are divorced, meaning they do not see eye to eye. And they now live in different environments. And they have different expectations and ideas about raising their children. And they therefore are always having arguments and disputes, and they go to court so very often. Divorced women might think that divorce is the ultimate solution, but they are brought in and out of court ever so often, and they don't know when eventually they will be free. Some of the women are in that kind of torture for over 10 years. And we also, of course, think that we should listen more to children. Yes, we subscribe to that. But in certain cases, some children have been subject to abuse in the family. But then the court might not think that the situation is serious, even if the children are made to be so afraid to go to the other parent's family. And sometimes the children are seen by the father only at an SWD office, and yet the children can hide under a table. When the mother tells the social workers about it, it seems their words would fall on deaf ears. And it is said that the parents should try to find another place for the children to be met by parents. But this is not anything reasonable, is it? Is it that we are in such shortage of resources so that you can't even arrange for a safe place for contact? And next, without a maintenance board, meaning women do not have actual support in their daily lives, what kind of basis can you have to talk about co-parenting? Next, Ms. Kwok Yin Ling. Concern Group on Family Violence.
For Concern for Legal Rights of Victims of Domestic Violence is very concerned with this legislation. I would start with a quote from Dr. Marsha Scott from Scottish Women's Aid. She said that discussions of child contact and court systems without mentioning domestic abuse are, I believe, akin to climate change's policies that ignore human influence, ill-informed and reckless. And this is sadly to be the case in the discussion of child custody and access bill in Hong Kong. Instead of being at the forefront and center, the issue of domestic violence is an afterthought and pretty much neglected. The presumption of joint parental custody and involvement in children's life following divorce is widespread in many judiciaries, including in the US, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. In all those countries for decades, abused mothers and children have been crying for help. The family court forced mothers to co-parent with their abusive ex-partner and compel children to maintain contact with their abusive father. In some cases, children spend less time with their mother or even are taken away from their mother to the hands of their abusive father because mothers who raise concerns about domestic violence are seen as uncooperative and manipulative parents. And anecdotal evidence from abused mothers and children show all of these are happening in Hong Kong as well. While Hong Kong's family court keeps refusing to share information, worldwide data shows that domestic violence allegations appear in majority of divorce and family court cases. In one court in Beijing, domestic violence is the #1 reason for divorce, with 85% of women said they suffered from domestic violence. According to His or Her Majesty's Inspectorate Court Administration in the UK, domestic violence features in 70% to 90% of cases going to family court. And according to academic Peter Jaffe, cited by US-based D. Philip, domestic violence is raised in 75% of contested custody cases in family court. But despite the big proportion of domestic abuse cases, only a small share of court cases result in children given no contact, indirect contact, or supervised contact with their abusive parents. Data from the US shows abusive fathers won 73% of their custody cases. The widespread belief that an abusive partner is still a good enough father has terrible consequences. There are cases of children and their mothers being killed by abusive fathers during visitations. And even if they are not dead or psychologically harmed, it is very likely they suffer from coercive control and other forms of psychological abuse. Fortunately, more and more countries are paying attention to this problem. Earlier this week, a new guideline for family court in England and Wales came into effect, which would give children protection from abusive fathers during custody disputes. The changes followed a women's aid campaign in the past year that sparked by cases of children being harmed or even killed by the abusive fathers during custodial visits. One particular case was the two sons of Claire Tossell, Jack and Paul, who were killed by their father in 2014. In Australia, family court has long been criticized for failing to protect abused mothers and children, and the government is now looking to revise their family law and family court system. Rosie Betty, a former Australia of the Year, whose son was killed by her abusive ex-partner during parental contact, said the family court forced children to spend time with abusive parents, putting them at risk and causing some to become suicidal. So the question is, Hong Kong said that they are following these countries in the legislation. And while these countries are looking to revise this, why are we going to the direction that they are going to abandon? Thank you.
Thank you for your time. 有議會者提出呢
This is the second time deputations have mentioned Australia and New Zealand. Are they backtracking? I think the Law Society or the officials can please give us some feedback on this issue. Next, Ms. Tang Hiu-ting. Thank you, Chairman. Personally, I object to introducing the parental responsibility model through legislation into Hong Kong because it's not going to address all the needs of families. I think that can be abused by parents in order to disturb or harass the other parent. Let us look at Australia, England, Wales, and New Zealand and other countries. Law reforms have been introduced in order to bring in the parent responsibility model. In some countries, they have assessed the effectiveness, and it is found that in two jurisdictions, there are doubts whether legislation can really bring in the parental responsibility scheme. One result is that there are more court cases. According to 2011 Canadian survey on the changed model, there have been more orders issued by England and Wales, and it is said that this may encourage people to take minor disputes to courts. And also in Australia, children orders applied for was on the increase. It is said that the parental responsibility model may be a tool used by non-residing parent to harass the other parent, and they may take very minor issues to court. And according to the survey, the Family Law Reform Act 1995, the first 3 years, it is pointed out that in Australia, the model has afforded more opportunities for abusive non-residing parent to question the decisions made by the residing parent. And the model may also become a new controlling tool by abusive non-residing parent. It is said that non-residing parent will always cite that they have been prevented from access in order to take cases to court. Many applications were used by abusive non-residing parent to harass the residing parent, and in fact, their disputes are not well-founded. And in fact, there are not enough support measures for the residing parents. And when you ask parents to become co-parenting parents, you are only dumping the responsibility on the weaker party, and you are creating more high-risk cases.
好，唔該晒。
Thank you. The parental responsibility model or co-parenting are certainly good principles, but they might inadvertently create more damage for domestic violence victims. Professor Puja, first Ms. Lam Chung Yan from the New People's Party. Thank you. We support the parental responsibility model in principle, and we also agree with securing best interests for the children. These are certainly rosy concepts. When dealing with cases of divorce, we cannot just look at the interests of parents. Parents have responsibility towards their children, and we all hope that children can receive love from their parents. But we are very concerned about the impacts or necessity of such measures. We have been talking about responsibility, but by time of divorce, parents often just think about their own interests. We are afraid that our children would suffer as a result. This is something which has happened before. We have approached a number of women associations before, and they also shared their concerns with us. They hope that legislation would not become a burden for them. The government has been promoting the parental model for a number of years, and they came up with a promotional slogan of preserving the love for their children even though the parents have divorced. A number of associations feel that not many parents actually know about their responsibilities, and we have not had enough discussions on the relevant legislation. Now we are pushing through further legislation. Can this really help the parents and children involved? Before legislation, can the government do even more? For example, by mandating family mediation between consenting divorced parents. Perhaps some other deputations can tell us how many families are willing to sit down and mediate. I'm sure there isn't many. So we need to educate them on their responsibilities, and more has to be done. And according to a study in Singapore, they also acknowledged such concepts, but they did not resort to legislation. They decided to do something within the current legislation. So we should review the impacts of our work. Finally, the New People's Party hopes for more discussion and consensus among the community before the government, the government needs to roll out more publicity and education initiatives before pushing through the legislation. I once saw this slogan by the Social Welfare Department when I was taking the MTR. But is there anything beyond this slogan? Professor Hu from the Faculty of Law at the University of Hong Kong.
To speak. So whilst it's a very welcome development that the government wishes to resolve to incorporate the best interest principle and the right of the child to be heard, the proposed bill is far from satisfactory in that it fails to incorporate substantively many of the concerns that continue to impact the practicality of the arrangements that the bill seeks to introduce across different spheres. For example, already this morning we've heard so many cases and stories of parents who are struggling to keep up with the requirements imposed by such a model, which, as we all know, is currently being piloted in the Hong Kong system. We continue to hear stories of children whose voices remain unheard. Even when assessed by social workers or child psychologists, their concerns, particularly regarding abusive parents, are downplayed. And in many cases, a professional risk assessment is lacking. This results in a high degree of stress on families that are already struggling, as we've heard. So the question really for us is, why is this happening? If social workers and other frontline responders are already being trained in this pilot program, why do we continue to hear such unsatisfactory responses under the current system? Is anyone documenting these, and what are the causative factors? Clearly, the model continues to give control to parents who may choose to use this as another opportunity to manipulate or influence decision-making regarding the child. Every decision, little or large, becomes a battleground for parents to contest, to influence the child's future. As the submissions today show, it remains unclear how you operationalize best interests of the child and how you're practically going to
listen to the voice of the child, which will remain muted. So in Hong Kong, we already recognize that as a society, there is still a strong degree of blame placed on women for failed marriages. When you have this equalizing approach to access to the child, you risk overriding the interests of the child. One must have an open mind when you are determined to consider the best interests of the child principle. But here, the approach of the courts or frontline officers seems to be, we must please both parents. We must not be seen to be taking sides of either parents. But that is not the relevant consideration. So I'm afraid we're far from implementing the model, even in its pilot stage. And so we'll be well to exercise much caution before just signing off on another piece of paper, which looks good on paper, but in practice we recognize that there are many, many flaws. I would like to spend the last minute perhaps on focusing on the incompatibility of the proposed bill with families which experience violence and have separated or divorced due to that reason. There are many stories of survivors that continue to battle attitudes of frontline responders, even lawyers and judges, who advise them against raising domestic violence as an issue when it comes to childcare arrangements. In fact, they are told you're going to be labeled as uncooperative or manipulative by the judge, so you better not raise it. What does this say about the perspective for safety of the child and risk management against any further harm being inflicted on the child? As you've heard from various deputations in the UK, US, New Zealand, and Canada, numerous steps have been taken to reassess the implementation of the shared parenting model because of the catastrophic outcomes of such a model being proposed and implemented without the necessary infrastructure in place. So I'd like to second the deputations who have advised that we first need the infrastructure before putting on paper into legislation these principles, which can be quite vacuous. I have 4 recommendations. The first is we need a comprehensive approach which ensures the system is ready to support and deliver on this model. It's imperative that this process be evidence-based. We need the courts to review their cases and advise us how many of the cases involving custody or divorce pertain to domestic violence. We also need to ensure that all personnel involved in handling family matters are trained more effectively, because clearly the current training is not adequate and not yielding the necessary results. This includes extending training to judges and all other officers involved in court procedures. And finally, it is recommended that the court regularly undertake a review, whether it's a review of their practice direction, which can already be brought into place. There's no need to wait for legislation of this kind. And then to evaluate the effectiveness of the practice direction, to see that the judges are indeed able to implement the model and obtain the desired results for the family that is in the best interest of the child. I worry that the current proposed bill is still relegating the child to the background, and certainly that cannot be done any longer. They have suffered enough in Hong Kong. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation.
So let's make the best use of the time. First of all, I will invite the SWD and HAD to respond before we open up to members. We have been talking about the one-stop integrated support center for divorced families and the setting up of a maintenance board. Ms. Ma, please. Thank you. We are very concerned about support services towards divorced families. So we are thinking about improving services for these families. Whether or not we legislate or we revise the legislation, we realize that existing services must be reinforced. We talked about children-based services, and this is certainly a focus. For cases involving children from divorced families, very often there are quarrels between the parents, and the children are suffering. So we are looking at how parents deal with their emotions stemming up from the separation, and how they parent their children. There are many aspects we must work on. First of all, the attitude towards divorce. We need to change public conception on this. So we will continue to carry out public education so that divorced parents would focus on their children. But public education alone is not enough. So we need other support measures as well. The current IFSCs serve different groups and individuals, and divorced families are among the service targets of the IFSCs. We would review whether any services can be enhanced and whether the IFSCs can help divorced families. So even with a lack of legislation or changes to the existing regime, we will still enhance our current services. We have been conducting short-term psycho-educational programs in order to reach out to divorced families or families who are about to divorce. And we are educating them on the consequences on their children. So these are services we must reinforce. For more contentious or charged cases, we launched a pilot scheme on children contact service, and on the basis of services offered at IFSCs and FCPSUs, we are exploring a new service model, and the pilot project will last 2 years. And through this project, we want to review the service mode and mode of operation to see whether we can meet the needs of such families. We are about to launch a review on the pilot project, and we will try to map the way forward for our future work.
We'd like to strengthen our work under the present system, but it doesn't mean that we're going to stop there. We'll continue to review service needs in order to strengthen and improve the services. You used 4 minutes 54 seconds, but you did not answer questions. The question was very direct. A one-stop divorced families support center. Are we going to have it? Thank you, Chair. As I was saying, the children contact service has just been started, and we are reviewing the support model for such families. Well, that proposed one-stop service is another model to provide service. Well, they are two different things. You have the children contact centers, and that will be subject to a 2-year pilot, and you are starting the review, as you said. But the one-stop divorced families support center, the deputations have been asking for that for many years. Will you consider it? We will consider that when we review the contact centers. Okay, the other issue, maintenance board. Do we have to wait another 20 years? Thank you, Chair. We'd like to thank the deputations and individuals for their valuable views. We understand very well the concern of members and deputations. In the past period, the government has taken a series of legislative and administrative measures to address this maintenance issue. And we also launch publicity and education, and we are sincere in considering other improvement measures. And it has been some time before we had an in-depth survey of the problem. And given the present data, which is incomprehensive, as the Law Society was saying, with regard to implementation of judgment summons, there has been some development recently, and we are going to commission a study in order to collect the latest information and data, and will avail ourselves to overseas experience. We'll ask the consultant to collect the implementation of maintenance orders and also experience on setting up a maintenance board from overseas. We understand your concern, and we are going to do this consultancy study so that we can review our policy in order to chart our way forward. I hope you understand. You have taken 20 years, and you haven't done any studies. Now, we are pushing you into a corner, and now you say you're going to commission a consultancy. That will again take 2 years. And then after that, you say there will be controversy, and it will be put on hold for 2 more years, and then the data will not be updated. So you are going to conduct another study. So how many more studies do you need before you can have a maintenance board? Some members would like to ask questions. Dr. K.K. Kwok, Ms. Yong, and Dr. Fernando Zhang, and also Mr. Kwok Wai Keung, as well as our Deputy Chairman. So the floor will now be open to members, 4 minutes each. Dr. K.K. Kwok. Thank you, Chair, and I thank the deputations for coming to speak on the parent or co-parenting model. Chairman, something is very interesting, isn't it? Suddenly, the administration has launched these recommendations of the LRC. And after listening to the deputations, it seems you are showing very good intentions, but you will end up doing a bad deed, because you are making use of the custody rights in order to address the problem of divorce and its impact on children. The deputations are saying you should help them, including providing a contact center or one-stop service. But the administration is ducking all those views. I think next year, as we heard from the social worker of the Hong Kong Family Welfare Society, they don't have money next year, and yet you are still talking about studies. Every year there are tens of thousands of divorce cases, and the cumulative number of people not getting maintenance payment has accumulated to 50,000. And I agree with the chairman that you are using the consultancy study in order to bring in more delays. You are trying to delay the issue. Those people who need the service and those people who provide the service are sitting right opposite you. They are speaking for the entire morning, and yet you are saying you go back and conduct a consultancy. You are wasting time. And in the end, I'm afraid you are just going to implement the LLC report on child custody and access. If you do everything that is basic, we don't mind, but then you are jumping the steps. You are not providing the support you should, and yet you shift the attention to the legislative route. You are using legislative amendments in order to address the problem, and I believe the situation will just deteriorate. Now, my question is for the administration. You have dragged your feet for 20 years on the issue of the maintenance board. When do you expect the consultancy to be completed? And when will you realize the setting up of a maintenance board? And secondly, the contact centers may be closed very soon because there are no resources. Well, I support that there should be one such one-stop service center in every district, but are you waiting for more domestic violence cases to happen? Remember, there was this case recently at the family court. A divorced man almost killed his wife at court. It was a narrow escape. Do you want to see more blood, more deaths before you act? HAB, the review first. Thank you. As I said, we understand the concern of members and deputations, but we are talking about the use of public money. And we are now preparing tendering documents. We hope that we can start the tendering process by the end of the year, and in early 2018 we can commission the consultancy. We believe it should be completed by mid-2019, and we'll come back to the relevant panels to make a report. 2019. What about contact centers? The pilot will end next year. What will happen? Mr. Chang, can you say something? It is a pilot scheme that will run for 2 years. Before the pilot ends, we will start to review its effectiveness and the way forward. As Ms. Ma was saying, we will take stock of the entire package of support measures, and will not just concentrate on the child contact centers. I heard many people talk about a package of support measures. Well, as I said in my introduction, we have the same views as you are. It's just that how it should be done. Different deputations have talked about a one-stop or integrated service center. That is something or one of the things we should consider, but there are resource implications and also whether we can find the space to do this. And then there is another option, and that is we have 60-odd IFSCs which dot Hong Kong. They are already here. But as deputations have said, the IFSCs are already under great pressure and that they may not be able to take up more work. If later on we can have new resources, as we said, whether or not there will be legislation, we'll continue to build the infrastructure. If there are new resources later, and so that we can do more, well, the sector, the government can continue to think about the service delivery model. But my question has not been answered. What happens when the children contact centers will be closed as a result of the termination of the pilot scheme? Will you be telling them whether they can continue after the pilot is over? As I said, we will do an overall evaluation, including the way forward for children contact. Will you be doing it, or are you going to contract it out? The SWD will do it. Ms. Eunice Yong. Well, divorced parents will have disputes over 3 things. 1, the responsibility, 2, custody and access, and 3, maintenance. However, there is implementation difficulty when there is domestic violence or high conflict parents. We can't see any supportive services to help them. That is why deputations are saying this is not the time to launch the co-parenting model. As Ms. Ma was saying, she has heard the aspirations of say that there should be a one-stop service. However, Ms. Ma shifted the issue to children contact, and she referred to the pilot. However, those are 2 separate issues. In fact, people are asking for a dedicated center, one-stop center, staffed by professionals. But children contact centers do not afford that kind of services. Professional services will not be provided to divorced parents. The psychoeducational program is just a small part. People are talking about a bigger concept of providing integrated professional service for divorced people. And as was said, the children contact service is only a pilot. Do you have a plan to regularize the service? I believe we all want a response. Number 3, maintenance board. You say you are going to commission a study. What is the timetable? And also, would there be a possibility at all that eventually we have a maintenance board? On the 27th of June, our panel went to visit a children contact center. We knew how it operated, we knew how unique it was, and we knew that it could not be turned into a one-stop service center. I think we conducted that visit, but Ms. Yong is asking you again whether you have a supplement. Can you understand that we are talking about two different things? We are talking about children contact service centers and then one-stop support centers. The two can run in parallel. And 2, the maintenance board. You say the study will be completed only in mid-2019. And perhaps there will be no future yet, even after the study. I think these are the questions. And in fact, they have been asked by Mr. Chang. Any supplement? Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to thank Ms. Eunice Yong for her questions. We understand that the pilot on children contact centers is not the same as the one-stop service centers proposed by deputations. Of course, we understand that, but I was saying that when we review the pilot scheme, we will also take up the service infrastructure for the proposed co-parenting model. Ms. Ma, would you like to say something else? Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to add one word. We understand that parents who are separated have different needs. The emphasis was on children contact. Definitely, that is one important need of such families. How can the parents coordinate and do co-parenting? Well, we of course know that that is another element. Of course, the children contact centers emphasizes contact, but we understand that is not the end of the needs of families who have divorced.
That's why during the review we would also address this. You said the SWD would take care of the review of the Children Contact Center. What has been the progress? The pilot project will end next year, so will it end in an abrupt manner? And there are specific service targets to the pilot project, and this service is rather new to Hong Kong. So together with the Welfare Society, we have been maintaining communication, and we will work with the Welfare Society as well. And we want to take in views from the service users. We are now preparing to start the review, and hopefully before the end of the pilot project we would know of the review outcome. I hope you are not just shifting the responsibility. You have been pointing at each other So at the end, you are putting the question to the deputations, right? None of them are against the contact centers. What about the maintenance board? Chairman, as I said, there's a lack of information on hand, and at the request of the Welfare Services Panel, we looked into the situation with relevant bodies that are involved with maintenance orders. So through our consultant, we want to collect more data. And we realize that some countries have maintenance boards, but we don't have any reference information on hand. So through our consultant, we want to know of the latest update, and we hope to conduct an evidence-based review. We have a professor here today. If you want to know about the operation of other maintenance boards, you can ask the professor. She did a lot of literature review, so there's no need to wait till mid-2019. So the government has been very humble in saying that you do not have the latest information. So how hard can that be? Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you. I'd like to thank the deputations for being here. According to the government's consultation exercise, half the people supported the idea while the other half were against. Myself and the chairman visited the Welfare Society's Children Contact Center, and we learned about its operation. We agreed that the project should be regularized. The government wants to introduce the bill into LegCo in early 2018. And according to your paper, you said you will have resource considerations and you will seek to enhance the support measures. You talked about a one-stop family support center for divorced families, and how many centers should we have, and how many children contact centers will we have? Do you have concrete plans on enhancing the support measures? Just now, the Workers' Union for Social Workers said that the frontline workers have been overworked. I hope the government can respond to such concern. Ms. Ma. Thank you. On the actual support measures, legislation will take place early 2018. But any changes to the law would have to go through a lengthy process. So we are not waiting for those. There's no need for us to wait for those procedures because we have identified current needs from families. We have introduced some different initiatives. And in terms of support services for divorced families, we want to assess the impacts of children contact service. You wrote that the bill will be introduced into LegCo in early 2018. So what will you introduce into LegCo? We said that the bill could be introduced into LegCo in early 2018 at the earliest, depending, and that is based on the progress of our work. We are not saying that the bill would necessarily be tabled by early 2018. We are still considering the way forward for this bill, having taken in different comments, but technically speaking, we can introduce the bill in early 2018 at the earliest. So will you introduce the bill into LegCo by early 2018? Will you introduce the blue bill? Or it might not necessarily happen. We will work on the legislative amendments before we consider the way forward for the bill. We are still considering the matter. So in other words, it might not be introduced by early 2018. Well, this is very hard to understand. Dr. Fernando Chang. Chairman, they will always consider, they will always review something, but at the end, it all comes to nothing. We are already at October, but the paper was drafted in May. We had a meeting in May, and I moved a motion in May, which was passed. We said that we had reservations at the proposal due to a lack of support, and maintenance payments are still being defaulted. That's why we asked for a maintenance board from the government first. And support should also be strengthened for divorced families. And we also talked about adding more children contact centers. It has been half a year already. And the government has taken in views from deputations and members. The motion was also passed at the panel, but the government did not respond at all. So your voices and the LegCo motion have been ignored while they continue to review and consider the issue, and they are pushing through the legislative amendment. They are still considering whether to introduce the bill. So is your work to just think or to act? You are out of touch with public sentiments. The spirit of the legislation is completely fine. And children would be the emphasis, and parents should have joint responsibility. No one would be against such principles. But with the legislation in place, how can you ensure that children's voices are heard? Who will listen to the children? So how can you ensure that children's voices would be heard? There isn't anything here. And in terms of the parental responsibility model, they don't even pay their maintenance payments, and they want to have a say on the education of their children. Whenever there is domestic violence, who would conduct the assessments? Who would conduct the who would assess the risks? At the family court, who can conduct the risk assessment? How many social workers from FCPSUs and IFSCs would file risk assessments. How many women are receiving $1 as a nominal maintenance payment? Do you have such figures? How many divorce cases involve domestic violence? Do you have these numbers, Ms. Ma? For cases of domestic violence or cases of divorce involving domestic violence, the family court did not provide such figures. What about cases of CSSA? How many recipients are receiving a $1 nominal payment? We do not have breakdown among CSSA recipients on this. How many people are resorting to CSSA because they cannot secure maintenance payments? We understand that a number of CSSA recipients are involved in disputes of maintenance payments. So at the end, you have no such figures. You don't know anything. In 2002, a working group review was completed, and the conclusion was again setting up a maintenance board. And according to the Home Affairs Bureau, they had no basic data and they outsourced the work to a consultant. So it's strange that a consultant knows more than the government. So suddenly the consultant digged up some information which the government doesn't have. And we will consider the matter again in 2019. So this is ridiculous. Does the government want to do something? If they want to promote joint responsibility and promote the best interests of the children, how can they be so slack? And I will extend the meeting by 15 minutes since some members are yet to speak. Mr. Ko Wai-Kang, thank you. We are all very professional.
Except the high-ranking officials as SWD. We have presented so many problems, and yet you have answered no questions. The NRC is making proposals, and so the administration wants to bring in legislative amendments. However, you are not doing anything downstream. In 2015, you completed public consultation, and yet no progress has been achieved. This is a problem indeed. I heard you don't even know how many people don't get maintenance and so go for CSSA. Why are you in your positions? It is not that we are mentioning this for the first time. This is not the first time you have heard it either. Yet you don't intend to do anything. You are dragging your feet. You want 2 more years to do a consultancy study. We have stated very clearly that we are not trying to block your legislative amendments, yet you are not providing supportive and complementary services. The childhood or children contact centers are just for a pilot, and you can't even guarantee there will be resources to sustain them until you complete your study. Can you not even promise that one, at least? Why is it that there are also fights at the children contact centers, and why is it that some people just cannot enter the contact centers? It is always because of the maintenance issue. We are now asking you to thresh out the maintenance problem and thresh out the responsibilities of parties and so that they will not argue and fight when they meet at children contact centers. But look, these are adults. You can't just rely on court orders to resolve problems. We are saying we want to be rational in order to tackle emotionally charged divorce cases. And yet, I don't think you are rational enough. I don't think you are evidence-based in your approach. How can the SWD convince us that you are determined to do something, that you are not just dragging your feet? Ms. Ma. As I said, well, I understand you are concerned about the Children Contact Service, but it is just a pilot. Why did we launch a pilot? It is exactly because there was no service model that was dedicated to children contact. That is why we launched the pilot, to try it out, to see whether this service model works. We really have to do the review before we will know the way forward, and before we can consider how to continue with it. No, the question was very simple. Can you guarantee that there will be enough resources for the centers to operate until you complete your review? Well, the service will just be for 2 years. And that is why we are advancing the review, so our colleagues will know where the service will go before it should terminate. When will you determine the way forward for the service? Well, it should terminate in August 2018, and by the middle of next year, we will determine the way forward. Deputy Chairman. Chairman, this is really heart-rending, isn't it? 40% of the people don't get maintenance payments, and 80% of those do not try to pursue payment because it is so difficult, and it seems now is a kind of alms or charity, and you rely on the kindness of the paying party in order to get payment. Many frontline workers tried to pursue the payments. And in fact, it is a kind of debt, isn't it? The other party should pay up, and yet you do not secure the payment. The problem has been with us for many years, and we are all agreed that there should be a maintenance board. And yet the SWD is again trying to buy time. We are asking you to pursue maintenance board, and yet you turn your attention to children contact centers. And I'm worried about the poverty rate of single parents. In fact, the poverty rate for single parents is higher than the general poverty rate. This is exactly because there are arrears of payment of maintenance. You have heard so much about it. As was said, when you do not provide resources for services, how can you, what position are you in to talk about legislative amendments? So my questions are, the SWD, are you going to drag your feet again with resources for example, the Hong Kong Family Welfare Society, which is operating the children contact centers? And secondly, what else can you say about maintenance payments? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kwong. About the pilot, before conducting a review, we cannot determine the future direction of the service. We know you are all very concerned about the service, but how it can become part of the ongoing service, and how can we have integrated services for divorced families? We hope we can include all these in the future review, and then we can come up with proposals. I hope your review is not just about continuing with the pilot or that we should bid farewell to the service. Last but not least, Mr. Junius Ho. I want to be the last speaker because I want to listen to everybody else first. In 1998, the Attorney General, actually in 1995, and also the Chief Justice have raised this issue of co-parenting issue. And in 1998, there was already initial recommendations by LRC, and 20 years have passed. Should we go forward with this, or should we stay put? It's very simple. If you say the parental responsibility model may not be suited for Hong Kong because there may be differences in concept between Western countries and ourselves, or whether there will be any conflict between child custody proposals and existing matrimonial laws. Now, since in 1998, there were initial recommendations, and if over 20 years, you can see that there are still differences in different areas, then should we not go back to the LRC for further clarification? As you can see from the consultation exercise, there are people for and against it, and it seems over the last 20 years, different things have happened. Shouldn't we review the concept again? And of course, if there is consensus in society, it will be simple for government, isn't it? It will just be a money issue. But at this stage, we are still arguing whether we should go for it. I thought in 1998 we had already made a decision, but it seems there are many things that are still outstanding. Mr. Chang says we are still not determined because we are still only having a draft bill yet. You conducted public consultation twice already. Are you still saying there are still matters of principle to be resolved, or are you already at the technical level? Personally speaking, I think it is very simple. Don't think the maintenance board will be the be-all and end-all of the problem. It may be a kind of duplication because the court can already issue maintenance orders. And I think now it is just an implementation problem. It is not a problem with the system. If you think the party is not paying up, you should go to the court to get an injunction. If you do not have money to go to court, you should go to the Legal Aid Council. Why are people proposing that the maintenance board will be the final solution? Actually, the mechanism is there, and I don't think the maintenance board would represent an ultimate solution. And I think it is now a matter of implementation of the legislation and whether you are providing sufficient legal aid for people to go to court. So my first question is that a matter of principle, or there are technical difficulties, or is it that you lack the money? I'm telling them they should go back and think about this because I don't think they can give me a determined reply. Okay, thank you. I think maybe deputations would like to say more. However, time is up. I know many deputations need to rush to another meeting. And the meeting is now declared adjourned. I will ask the administration to take note and consider issues raised by members and deputations today. First, maintenance board. You say by mid-2019 you may make a decision, but that is too late and it is unacceptable. The pilot scheme on children contact services. We don't think there is any argument. We just want to regularize it. And it is a matter of 4 or 5 or 18. It should be children-based. It should be gender-sensitive. I hope you will take up all these and try to implement them during your review. And then the Labor and Welfare Bureau. We hope you will come back with something concrete by early 2018. Will this remain just a document, or will it become a measure that will benefit the public? Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned here, and I thank members and deputations and individuals for attending.